The fourth test threw Hyunwoo into the cold emptiness of space, but this was not the peaceful void most people imagined. Instead, he found himself in a massive three-dimensional maze built from the broken remains of old spaceships, twisted metal. Hulks floated in perfect formation, held in place by invisible gravity machines. The maze stretched for kilometers in every direction, creating a labyrinth that challenged both the mind and body chunks of asteroids drifted between the ship remains. Some pieces were as small as rocks, others were as big as buildings. The artificial gravity fields kept everything locked in precise positions, creating passages and dead ends that formed a complex puzzle in 3 dimensions. There was no up or down. In this place, only the maze itself extending in every direction. His opponent was Zephyrin, a Voidwalker, whose species had evolved in the asteroid belts around their home star. The Voidwalkers were natural space dwellers with bodies adapted for the emptiness between worlds. Their internal organs could handle pressure changes, and their long limbs could lock into rigid positions for precise movement. In zero gravity, Zephyrin moved through the maze like he was born for it, which in many ways was his arms and legs locked and unlocked in perfect sequence, allowing him to push off surfaces and change direction with almost no wasted energy. His large eyes could track multiple objects at the same time, giving him superior awareness of the complex three-dimensional environment. The observers watched as Zephyrin began hunting through the maze. This test was designed to favor species with natural space adaptation, and the Voidwalkers were considered masters of zero-gravity combat. Most candidates struggled just to figure out which way was forward in the floating labyrinth, let alone fight effectively within it. But once again, Hyunwoo surprised everyone by completely ignoring what the test was supposed to measure, instead of trying. To navigate the maze or hunt his opponent through the twisted passages, he moved to one of the larger broken spaceships and began examining its structure with intense focus. Using his suit's cutting tools, he started making careful cuts in the ship's metal hull. To the watchers, it looked like he was trying to break into the vessel, perhaps looking for better weapons or a place to hide. But as his cutting pattern became clear, they realized he was doing something far more systematic and strange. Hyunwoo was studying how the broken spaceship was built. These test vessels were perfect copies of real spacecraft, complete with authentic power systems, structural weak points, and electrical connections. While Zephyrin hunted through the maze using his natural advantages, the human was learning how the entire environment was constructed. The breakthrough came when Hyunwoo found a power relay that was still functioning. The broken ships were not just decorative obstacles floating in space. They were actually part of the maze's infrastructure, providing electricity to the gravity generators that kept all the debris in perfect formation. By understanding how the power grid worked, he could understand how the maze itself was built. The gravity machines needed constant electricity to maintain their fields. If that power was interrupted, the carefully arranged debris would begin floating according to natural physics instead of artificial control as Zephyrin closed in on his position, moving through the passages with the fluid grace of someone born in space. Hyunwoo made his move. He overloaded the power relay, causing a chain reaction that shut down gravity generators in a specific section of the maze. The effect was catastrophic from Zephyrin's perspective. The stable maze he had been navigating suddenly became a chaotic storm of moving obstacles. Without artificial gravity to hold them in place, hundreds of debris pieces began drifting according to their natural momentum and the gravity of nearby objects. His perfect spatial awareness, evolved for predictable three-dimensional movement, could not adapt quickly enough to the rapidly changing environment. Pieces of metal that had been solid walls suddenly became moving projectiles. Passages that had been stable routes became deadly obstacle courses filled with unpredictable hazards. But Hyunwoo had calculated the debris paths before triggering the power failure. He knew which pieces would move where and how fast they would travel. He used the drifting chunks like stepping stones, riding the momentum of larger pieces while avoiding the dangerous, smaller fragments. What had been a stable maze became a dynamic transportation system that only he knew how to navigate. The floating debris carried him through the chaotic environment along routes that would have been impossible when everything was held in fixed positions. The final battle took place in the chaos of the collapsing maze section. While Zephyrin struggled to maintain his position among the swirling debris, Hyunwoo approached along a path that no one could have predicted. His route took him under, over, and around obstacles that were moving in patterns only he understood the Void Walkers. Natural advantages meant nothing in an environment that no longer followed the laws he had evolved to navigate. His perfect space adaptation was designed for stable conditions, not for a three-dimensional storm of moving hazards. When the test ended, Hyunwoo emerged from the fourth simulation, having once again transformed the test environment into his primary weapon. This was no longer just unconventional tactics. This was a complete reimagining of what combat could be in the observation deck. Silence had replaced the earlier discussions. The senior staff watched as readings showed impossible gravitational signatures and power fluctuations. The human had not just manipulated his surroundings, he had temporarily rewritten how an entire section of space behaved. Commander Veltar found himself facing a decision that would affect the entire academy. The human had proven that he could turn any environment into an advantage, but he had also revealed critical weaknesses in their testing methods. If one candidate could manipulate the simulations this dramatically, what did that say about their evaluation systems? Sir Rindal approached carefully. The Galactic Council is requesting immediate reports on the human candidate. Word is spreading about his methods. Veltar nodded slowly. What is the reaction? Mixed, sir. Some species are expressing concern about humans joining the space forces. Others are requesting immediate contact with Earth to discuss alliance possibilities. The commander understood their concern. A species that could turn any environment into a weapon would be either invaluable allies or terrifying enemies. The human had demonstrated abilities that challenged not just individual fighting techniques, but entire strategic frameworks that had governed galactic warfare for thousands of years. As the fifth test prepared to load, Veltar made his decision: continue the testing. But I want complete documentation of everything. The Council is going to want detailed analysis of every tactic. The fifth test was about to begin, and everyone in the Academy knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. The human had not just passed 4 tests, he had redefined what the tests themselves meant. Now they would see if there were any limits to his ability to transform environments into weapons. The gravity station simulation began to materialize around the preparation chamber. Complex fields that could pull in multiple directions started to form. Variable gravity zones appeared, where the laws of physics themselves could be twisted and manipulated, but everyone watching suspected that even impossible physics would somehow become the human's ally in the battle ahead. The question was not whether he would find a way to use the environment. The question was how he would bend reality itself to his will. The fifth test created the most mind-bending environment yet. A massive space station appeared around Hyunwoo with gravity fields that pointed in every direction. Some areas pulled toward the floor, like normal other sections had gravity that pulled toward the walls or ceiling. Still other zones had multiple gravity sources, creating impossible conditions where objects could fall in several directions at once. Walking through this place was like being inside a puzzle where the rules changed with every step. In some rooms, Hyunwoo could walk on the ceiling while furniture hung from what used to be the floor. In other areas, he would step through a doorway and suddenly find himself falling sideways as gravity shifted 90 degrees. This test had been designed to challenge how well different species could adapt to artificial environments. Many space civilizations built structures with non-standard gravity setups, and good fighters needed to stay effective no matter which way was up. The complex gravity fields created a truly three-dimensional battlefield where normal ideas about high ground and positioning meant nothing. Hyun-woo's opponent was Gravek, a member of the Titan collective whose species had evolved on a world with 3 moons. The constantly changing tidal forces and variable gravity of their home planet had given them internal organs that could adjust to different gravitational stresses. Their brains processed spatial relationships in ways that let them fight effectively regardless of which direction was down. Gravek was massive even by Titan standards. His muscles were dense enough to handle high-gravity environments, and his reflexes were trained to work in conditions where gravity could change without warning. He could walk on walls and ceilings as easily as floors, and his fighting techniques used gravity changes as natural parts of his combat style. As the test began, Gravek immediately showed his advantages. He used the station's gravity fields like a highway system, dropping from the ceiling to attack from above, then using a perpendicular gravity field to fall sideways around corners. His huge frame moved with surprising grace as he adapted to each new gravitational environment. With instinctive ease, most candidates who faced this test spent their time learning to fight in the variable gravity conditions. They would practice moving and keeping their balance while trying to engage their opponent. It was supposed to be a test of adaptability and spatial reasoning skills. But Hyun-woo, as everyone had come to expect, was doing something completely different. Instead of adapting to the gravity fields, he was studying the station's infrastructure. Using his suit's sensors, he mapped the locations of gravity generators throughout the structure. While Gravek hunted through the maze of variable fields, the human was learning how the entire artificial environment worked. The space station was incredibly detailed, featuring real gravity generation technology based on actual physics. The artificial fields were created by a network of generators positioned throughout the structure, each one carefully tuned to create specific gravitational effects in different areas. The gravity machines worked by manipulating space-time itself, bending the fabric of reality to create artificial mass effects. It was incredibly advanced technology that most species barely understood, but Hyun-woo approached it like any other engineering problem. Something that could be analyzed, understood, and ultimately controlled. As Gravek closed in on his position, moving with the fluid confidence of someone perfectly adapted to variable gravity, Hyun-woo made his most daring move yet. He did not just shut down a single system. Instead, he began systematically overloading gravity generators in a specific sequence. The effect was beyond anything the observers had imagined possible. Instead of simply removing gravity or changing its direction, Hyun-woo created gravitational interference patterns. When multiple gravity fields overlapped in precisely calculated ways, they could amplify, cancel out, or create entirely new force vectors. Sections of the station began experiencing gravitational shear areas where objects could be pulled in multiple directions at the same time. The conflicting forces created zones where even the strongest materials would be torn apart. Other areas developed gravity wells so intense that even Gravek's adapted body could not handle them. Still other sections became zero-gravity zones surrounded by high-gravity barriers, creating three-dimensional traps that were impossible to escape once entered. The normal rules of physics had been twisted into weapons that no species had ever encountered before. Gravek, for all his natural advantages, had never faced anything like this. His people had evolved to handle variable gravity, but not impossible gravity. When the laws of physics themselves became weapons, even perfect adaptation was not enough. The Titan warrior found himself trapped between conflicting force fields that pulled his massive body in different directions. His adapted organs that normally let him handle gravity changes were overwhelmed by forces that defied natural law. His spatial reasoning skills meant nothing when space itself no longer behaved logically. The final battle took place in a section where Hyun-woo had created a gravitational spiral, a rotating field that pulled objects into a predictable orbital pattern. While Gravek struggled against forces that his evolved instincts could not comprehend, the human used the artificial physics he had created to approach along an impossible trajectory, moving through the twisted gravity fields like a dancer following music. Only he could hear Hyun-woo reached his opponent and delivered the final strike. The test ended with Gravek defeated by forces that no Titan had ever imagined could exist, as Hyun-woo emerged. From the fifth test, the Academy had gone beyond silence into something approaching shock. In the observation deck, representatives from dozens of species stared at readings that showed impossible gravitational signatures. The human had not just manipulated his environment, he had temporarily rewritten the laws of physics within the simulation. Commander Veltar stood at the center of a storm of urgent communications. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy as news of the humans' abilities spread. Some species were offering immediate alliance treaties. Others were demanding that humans be classified as a potential threat to galactic security. Sir Rindal's voice was tight with concern. The final test is ready, but several council members are suggesting we halt the evaluation. They are saying the humans' abilities represent an unprecedented security. Veltar considered this carefully. Throughout galactic history, the most dangerous conflicts had occurred when one species developed capabilities that others could not counter. The human's ability to turn any environment into a weapon was exactly the kind of advantage that could upset the balance of power between civilizations. But there was another consideration. If humans could do this, others might learn similar techniques. The Academy needed to understand these methods to develop countermeasures and training programs. Stopping the test now would leave them vulnerable to tactics they did not fully understand. 1. More test, Veltar decided. We need to see the full extent of his capabilities, but increase security monitoring and prepare detailed reports for the counselors. The sixth and final test prepared to load everyone in the Academy understood they were witnessing a potential turning point in galactic history. The human had already proven he could manipulate ice rock plants, debris fields, and gravity itself. What would he do when faced with the ultimate challenge? An environment specifically designed to counter his unconventional tactics. The final test would either prove his limits or show that human ingenuity had no bounds at all. The preparation chamber began to shift and change as the most complex simulation ever created started to load. Multiple environments began to blend together and advanced countermeasures activated to prevent environmental manipulation. The ultimate test was about to begin. The final test was unlike anything the Academy had ever created. Instead of a single environment, it combined elements from all the previous challenges. Rocky terrain, ice formations, jungle plants, space debris, and variable gravity fields all existed, together in one impossible landscape. But more than that, it included active defense systems, specifically designed to prevent environmental manipulation. The testing engineers had worked desperately between the fifth and sixth tests, creating new safety measures. Gravity generators were protected by energy shields and powered by multiple backup sources. Structural elements were reinforced with materials that could resist cutting tools. Monitoring systems tracked every energy signature and tool usage throughout the simulation. If the human tried to manipulate his surroundings, the environment itself would fight back. Every power conduit would seal itself when approached. Every structural weak point would automatically strengthen, advanced. Computers would predict and counter any attempt to use the battlefield as a weapon. His final opponent was the most challenging yet. Commander Thoxian, a battle-tested veteran from the Academy's own teaching staff. Thoxian belonged to the strategist class of the Cerebral Collective, a species that had elevated tactical thinking to an art form. His massive brain could process thousands of variables at the same time, predicting opponent behavior and developing counters before strategies could even be attempted more. Importantly, Thoxian had studied recordings of all 5 previous tests. He understood the human's methods and had prepared specific countermeasures for each tactic. This was not just a test of fighting ability, it was a battle between 2 completely different approaches to warfare. As the test began, Hyunwoo found himself in the center of a nightmare scenario. Every time he approached a structural element to examine it, automated defense systems activated, red lights flashing and alarms sounding. When he tried to access power conduits, they sealed themselves with metal barriers. The environment itself had been turned into a weapon against his methods. Thoxian moved through this hostile landscape with calculated precision. His strategic mind had identified optimal routes, defensive positions, and attack vectors. He advanced methodically, cutting off the human's access to potential tools and manipulation points. Everything was proceeding according to his careful analysis. The strategist's brain worked like a massive computer, processing every possible action the human might take and preparing responses. His species had spent millions of years perfecting the art of prediction and counter-strategy. No opponent had ever surprised them for long. But as the 2 fighters moved toward their inevitable confrontation, something unexpected happened. Hyunwoo stopped trying to manipulate the environment directly. Instead, he began moving in patterns that seemed almost random, running toward dead ends, climbing structures that led nowhere, making cuts in materials that served no apparent purpose. In the observation deck, tactical analysts tried to understand the human's behavior. Had he finally been defeated by an environment that actively resisted manipulation? Was he panicking under the pressure of facing an opponent who understood his methods? Thoxian certainly thought so. His analysis indicated that the human was behaving irrationally, wasting energy on pointless activities. The strategist pressed his advantage, moving to corner his opponent in a section of the simulation where terrain features would limit movement options. The end seemed certain. Thoxian had superior tactical knowledge, detailed understanding of human methods, and an environment designed to prevent environmental manipulation. His massive brain had calculated victory with mathematical certainty. That is when Hyunwoo revealed the true scope of human tactical thinking. Every seemingly random action had been carefully planned, but not to manipulate the environment directly. Instead, he had been learning how the countermeasures themselves worked. While the simulation had been designed to prevent environmental manipulation, it still had to follow the same physical laws that governed real environments. The human had not been trying to break or override the defensive systems. Instead, he had been studying their response patterns and limitations. He learned how fast they activated what triggered their responses, and most importantly, how they interacted with each other when multiple systems activated simultaneously. When the final confrontation began, Hyunwoo used the countermeasures themselves as weapons. By triggering defensive responses in specific sequences, he created cascading effects throughout the simulation. The systems designed to prevent environmental manipulation ended up reshaping the battlefield in ways their designers never intended. Gravity fields shifted to counter his movements, but created opportunities for different approaches. Structural reinforcements activated in patterns that provided new tactical advantages. Defense barriers rose and fell in sequences that created temporary passages and hiding spots. The battle between Hyunwoo and Thoxian became something unprecedented, a fight where one combatant used the environment while the other used the systems designed to control the environment. It was strategy against adaptation, prediction against improvisation, the accumulated wisdom of galactic civilization against human creativity. Thoxian's massive brain struggled to process what was happening. His careful analysis had accounted for environmental manipulation, but not for the manipulation of anti-manipulation systems. The countermeasures were creating effects that his strategic calculations had never considered possible. The strategist found himself fighting not just the human, but also the very systems that were supposed to help him. The defensive measures activated in response to Hyunwoo's actions But their effects changed the battlefield in ways that disrupted Thoxian's planned tactics. Energy barriers meant to block the humans' access to power systems created walls that blocked the strategists' movement. Gravity fields that shifted to counter environmental manipulation changed the physics of their confrontation. Reinforced structures that were supposed to prevent cutting became obstacles that altered sight. Lines and approach routes. In the end, human adaptability proved superior to strategic prediction. Thoxian's careful analysis had prepared him for every known form of environmental manipulation, but not for tactics that turned anti-environmental systems into environmental weapons. When the simulation ended, the greatest strategic mind in the Academy lay defeated by methods that even his species' military geniuses had never imagined. As Hyunwoo emerged from the sixth and final test, the Academy fell into complete silence. He had not only passed every challenge, but had redefined what the challenges themselves meant. More than that, he had proven that human tactical thinking operated on levels that other species had not known existed. Commander. Veltar stood at the observation window watching the human remove his testing equipment with calm efficiency. Behind him, urgent communications flooded in from across the galaxy. The implications of what they had witnessed were still being calculated. But one thing was absolutely clear. Humanity's arrival in the galactic community would change everything. Sir Rindal approached with a datapad containing preliminary reports. What do we tell the Council? Veltar was quiet for a long moment, considering the weight of his response. The human had proven that his species possessed capabilities that could revolutionize warfare exploration and problem-solving throughout the galaxy. They could turn any environment into an advantage, adapt to any countermeasure, and find solutions that others could not even imagine. Tell them, the commander finally said, that we need to rewrite our training manuals and send an immediate diplomatic invitation to Earth. If humans can do this, we need them as allies, not enemies. As news of the test results spread across the galaxy, civilizations began preparing for a new age. The species that had turned against their own training simulators would reshape how everyone thought about conflict cooperation and the very nature of problem-solving itself. Humanity had announced their arrival in the galaxy not with superior technology or overwhelming military force, but with something. The jungle came alive around Hyunwoo like a green ocean. Massive trees with trunks wider than spaceships rose up toward the sky so high that their tops disappeared in the misty air. Thick vines hung down like ropes connecting the branches together. The air was warm and wet, and filled with the sounds of creatures moving through the leaves. Green light filtered down through the thick canopy above, making everything look mysterious and strange. The ground was covered with fallen leaves that made soft sounds when stepped on. Flowers with bright colors grew on the trees, and their sweet smell mixed with the earthy smell of the jungle floor. This was supposed to be the hardest test yet. The jungle environment challenged fighters in every way. The uneven ground made walking difficult. The thick plants blocked vision in every direction. The three-dimensional nature of the forest meant enemies could attack from above, below, or any side. Most candidates got confused just trying to move through. The maze of trees and vines. Hyunwoo's opponent was Tekla, a shadowkin assassin whose people had evolved in jungles just like this one. Her skin could change colors to match any background, making her nearly invisible. Her long arms and legs gave her perfect balance for moving through the trees like a monkey. Her ears could hear the smallest sounds from very far away. The Shadowkin were considered the ultimate jungle fighters, their natural camouflage, superior agility, and deep understanding of forest environments made them nearly unbeatable in this kind of terrain. Several of the watching aliens nodded with approval. Surely this would be the test that showed the humans' limitations. As the test began, Tekla immediately vanished into the jungle canopy. Her form blended so perfectly with the shadows and leaves that even the advanced sensors had trouble following her. This was exactly what everyone expected. A proper jungle hunt where the superior predator would stalk her prey through familiar territory, but Hyunwoo did not behave like prey at all. Instead of trying to track his invisible opponent or find good hiding spots, he began doing something that looked almost like gardening. Using his combat knife and weapon, he started cutting specific vines and branches, letting them fall to the jungle floor in what seemed like random patterns. In the observation deck, the Shadowkin representative made a soft hissing sound that might have been laughter. The human is making noise and destroying his own cover. Tekla will end this quickly. Indeed, Tekla was already moving through the trees above, following the sounds of Hyunwoo's strange activities. Her camouflaged form flowed from branch to branch like liquid shadow, positioning herself for the perfect killing strike. She could see the human below, apparently unaware of his danger, as he continued his odd cutting work. The jungle was Tekla's natural highway. Her people had evolved to use the three-dimensional. Forest, like other species, used flat ground. The network of branches and vines created pathways that allowed her to move above her prey without ever touching the ground. She was the perfect predator in the perfect environment. But as she prepared to drop down for the final attack, Tekla discovered something impossible. The jungle had changed around her. The vines she needed to swing between branches were no longer there. They had been cut and fallen to the ground. The branches that should have supported her weight had been carefully weakened. The entire three-dimensional highway that her species relied on had been systematically destroyed. For the first time in the test, Tekla found herself forced to fight on the ground level in an environment that Hyunwoo had specifically modified to his advantage. The fallen branches and vines created obstacles that blocked her natural movement patterns while providing him with improvised weapons and barriers. The human had not been randomly cutting plants. He had been studying the jungle's structure and deliberately removing the elements that gave his opponent her greatest advantages. While she had been positioning herself for the perfect attack, he had been restructuring the entire battlefield. When Tekla finally attacked, dropping from her compromised position in the trees, Hyunwoo was ready. He had used the time she spent repositioning to prepare the battlefield exactly as he wanted it. The very jungle that should have been her greatest strength had been turned into his weapon. The fight was brief but decisive. Stripped of her three-dimensional mobility and forced to engage on modified terrain, Tekla could not use the natural advantages that made her species. Such effective jungle fighters, Hyunwoo had essentially terraformed the entire battlefield during the opening minutes of the test. The fallen vines became ropes that he used to trip and tangle his opponent. The weakened branches broke when she tried to use them for support, creating distractions and obstacles. The cleared areas gave him open spaces to maneuver, while the remaining thick vegetation provided him with cover. Tekla fought bravely, but she was fighting in a jungle that no longer followed the rules her instincts understood. Every movement she tried to make was blocked by some change the human had made to the environment. Her perfect camouflage meant nothing when the terrain itself was working against her, as Hyunwoo emerged from the third test. The observation deck was no longer filled with casual interest. Senior instructors gathered in urgent conversations. Representatives from various species sent rapid messages back to their homeworlds. What they were witnessing challenged basic assumptions about combat that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. Commander Veltar stood and walked to the window. His reflection looked ghost-like against the glass. Behind him, he could hear heated discussions about whether the humans' tactics were even legal under traditional rules of war. But the Academy's testing rules were clear. Candidates could use any means necessary to defeat their opponents within the simulation parameters. The problem was that no one had ever thought to rewrite the parameters themselves. Sir, came a voice behind him. It was Rindal, his assistant. The senior staff is requesting an emergency meeting. Some are suggesting we halt the testing. Veltar's yellow eyes remained fixed on the human as he prepared for the fourth test. On what grounds? They are saying his methods are unpredictable, that we cannot properly evaluate a candidate who does not follow established combat principles. The commander was quiet for a long moment. In all his years of military service, he had seen many different fighting styles. Many species had unique approaches to warfare, but none had ever thought to remake the battlefield itself as their primary strategy. Rindal, he finally spoke without turning around. In your opinion, would you rather have this human as an ally or an enemy? The assistant thought seriously about the question. An ally, sir. Definitely an ally. Then we continue the testing. Alert. The simulation technicians to monitor their systems more. Carefully, I have a feeling the next test is going to be even more interesting. As the fourth test began loading, Hyun-woo stood calmly in the preparation chamber. Around him, the other candidates watched with new respect, mixed with unease. They were beginning to understand that they were not just witnessing unusual tactics, they were seeing the birth of an entirely new form of warfare. The space maze simulation started to appear around the chamber. Floating debris and twisted metal structures began to materialize in the zero-gravity environment. Soon Hyun-woo would face a Voidwalker warrior in three-dimensional combat among the stars. But everyone watching knew that the human would find a way to turn even the emptiness of space into his ally. The only question was how he would do it this time. The ice world appeared around Hyun-woo like a white dream. Everything was frozen and beautiful. Tall ice mountains reached up to the gray sky. The ground was covered with thick ice that looked like glass. When he breathed, the air was so cold it made tiny clouds. The lake where he stood was perfectly smooth. The ice was clear enough to see down into the dark water below. His boots made small scratching sounds when he moved. Everything was quiet except for the wind blowing across the frozen land. Across. From him, his new opponent began to form. The Krithak fighter called Drakon was made of living crystal that sparkled in the cold light. His body was clear like ice, but much harder. His arms and legs could change shape whenever he wanted them to. As the test began, his arms became long, sharp spears that gleamed like knives. In the watching room above, the aliens leaned forward to see better. The Krithak were famous across the galaxy for being almost impossible to beat in a fight. They could change their body into any shape they needed. Spears, hammers, shields, even wings. If they wanted to fly. Most fighters tried to attack them very quickly before they could change or tried to run away and shoot from far away. Drakon started running across the ice toward Hyun-woo. His feet changed into sharp spikes that gripped the ice perfectly. His crystal body reflected the light as he moved, making him look like a living diamond. His spear arms were ready to strike, but Hyun-woo was already moving in a way that made no sense to anyone watching. Instead of getting ready to fight or running away, he started running in a big circle around the edge of the frozen lake. His boots slipped a little on the smooth ice, but he kept his balance. The crystal warrior changed direction to follow him. Drakon's body adapted to move even faster on the ice. His legs became longer and his feet grew more spikes. He was gaining on the human with every step as he ran. Hyun-woo pulled out his weapon, but he did not aim it at his enemy. Instead, he shot at the ice under his own feet. The energy beams made small cracks that spread out like spider webs. Everyone watching was confused. Was the human trying to break the ice? Was he panicking? The Krithak was getting closer. His crystal body was now shaped like a perfect ice-skating predator. His arms were sharp spears and his legs were built for speed on the frozen surface. Victory seemed certain as he closed the distance to the smaller human, but Hyun-woo had a plan that nobody could see. Yet the cracks he had made in the ice were not random. They formed a careful pattern around the edges of the lake. The cracks weakened the ice structure in some places, but left other areas strong. The center of the lake, where the ice was thickest, was still solid. As Drakon chased him toward the middle of the lake, Hyun-woo suddenly dropped down flat on the ice. He spread his arms and legs wide to spread his weight across the surface like a starfish. The Crystal Warrior was moving too fast to stop. His heavy crystal body hit the weakened ice structure exactly where Hyun-woo had planned. The whole lake surface gave way, and both fighters fell into the freezing water below. But this is where Hyun-woo's plan became clear. The Crystak's body was made of living crystal, which was much heavier than human flesh. Drakon sank into the dark water like a stone. His crystal body was too heavy to float. Hyun-woo, on the other hand, knew how to swim. His human body was lighter, and he had learned to move in water since he was a child. He swam up to a piece of solid ice that had not broken and pulled himself out of the water. From his safe position on the ice shelf, Hyun-woo could see Drakon struggling. In the water below, the Crystal Warrior tried to change his body to be better at swimming, but his mineral body worked against him in the liquid. Water was not an environment his species had evolved for. The Crystak thrashed in the water trying to reach the surface, but his heavy crystal form kept pulling him down. His sharp spear arms were useless underwater. His adapted legs could not push against the liquid effectively. Hyun-woo aimed his weapon down at the struggling creature in the water. The test was over in seconds. The watching room fell completely silent. Commander Veltar's claws made clicking sounds as he gripped his chair tighter. Once again, the human had ignored the normal way of fighting and turned the battlefield itself into his weapon. "The Crystal People are the best fighters in the galaxy," whispered an insect-like alien called Karath. Her species had won many battles using smart tactics, but this human made the Crystak's own strength work against him. Another alien shook his head. "The simulators are not designed for this kind of environmental manipulation. The computers make everything realistic, but they never expected someone to use that realism as a weapon." But that was exactly what Hyun-woo had done. The test rooms were built to be perfect copies of real places. Every detail was authentic, including how ice breaks under weight, how water behaves, and how different materials sink or float. The designers had made everything realistic, but they never imagined someone would use those realistic details to win fights. Hyun-woo climbed out of the test chamber, water still dripping from his suit. The other candidates stared at him with respect and wonder. They came from warrior cultures that had perfected fighting techniques over thousands of years. Yet this human seemed to approach combat from a completely different angle. One of the candidates, a reptilian creature with red scales, approached him. "How did you know the ice would break in that pattern?" Hyun-woo smiled. "Ice is just frozen water. It follows the same rules as any other material. If you understand how stress spreads through a structure, you can predict where it will fail." The red-scaled alien looked confused. "Stress structure. What do these words mean in combat?" "That is exactly the point," Hyun-woo replied. "Most species think of fighting and engineering as separate things, but humans see them as connected. Everything around us can be used if we understand how it works." Commander Veltar watched this conversation through the glass window. The human was not just using unusual tactics. He was thinking about the universe in a fundamentally different way. Other species had developed specialized combat skills over millions of years, but humans seemed to approach every problem as if it could be solved by understanding the basic rules that governed everything. The third test was beginning to load. Veltar found himself genuinely curious about what would happen next. The human had now proven twice that his victories were not accidents. There was a pattern here, a completely different way of thinking about conflict that challenged everything. The Academy thought it knew. The jungle simulation began to materialize around the preparation. Chamber-thick green plants and tall trees started to appear. The air became warm and humid. Somewhere in that green maze, a Shadowkin assassin was waiting. An alien that could become invisible and move through trees like flowing water. But Veltar had a feeling that even the perfect jungle predator was about to learn something new about what it meant to be hunted. The human was preparing for his third test, and everyone in the academy was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something that would change warfare forever. In the jungle ahead, Tekla the Shadowkin warrior was already moving through the trees. Her camouflaged skin blended perfectly with the shadows and leaves. She was confident that this strange human would fall quickly to her superior hunting skills. She had no idea that she was about to become the hunted instead of the hunter. The giant metal building stood tall like a mountain on planet Viridian Prime. The walls were so thick that even the strongest weapons could not break them. Inside the building, bright lights made everything look white and clean. The air smelled like metal and electricity. Young fighters from all over the galaxy came here to prove they were good enough to join the space. Army Commander Veltar walked slowly through the long hallway. His green scales caught the light as he moved. His yellow eyes had seen many tests over the years. He knew which fighters would pass and which ones would fail before they even started. Most aliens followed the same patterns when they fought. The fast ones tried to run around their enemies. The strong ones tried to hit hard. The smart ones tried to trick their opponents. Today was different, though. Today there was a human in the group. The human stood quietly with the other candidates. His name was Hyun-woo, and he was shorter than most of the others. His black hair was cut short, and his dark eyes looked at everything around him. The other aliens whispered to each other. They wondered what special powers this strange new creature might have. The testing room was huge with white walls that could turn into anything. The computers could make perfect copies of any place in the galaxy. Mountains, oceans, cities, even the inside of spaceships. Everything looked real and felt real because it was real. The only difference was that nobody could actually die. Here Veltar pressed a button on his control panel. The first test began. The walls around Hyun-woo disappeared. He was now standing in a hot desert. The sand was yellow and soft under his feet. Tall rocks rose up from the ground like giant fingers. The sun was bright and hot. Even though it was not real, sweat started to form on his face across the desert. A monster appeared. It was a Bruthan warrior with 4 arms and skin like metal armor. The creature was 3 times bigger than Hyun-woo. Its feet were as big as dinner plates. When it walked, the ground shook. The Bruthan opened its mouth and roared so loud that sand fell from the rocks. All the watchers leaned forward in their seats. They knew what would happen next. Most fighters would run straight at the monster or try to dodge around it. The Bruthan was strong but slow. Most species had learned to use speed or tricks to win, but Hyun-woo did something nobody expected. Instead of looking at the giant monster, he looked down at the sand under his feet. He kicked it with his boot and watched how it moved. He looked at the rocks around him and saw how they were cracked in some places. The monster was charging toward him with heavy steps, but Hyun-woo seemed more interested in the ground. The Bruthan got closer and closer. Its 4 arms swung back and forth, ready to grab the small human. Everyone thought Hyun-woo would start running or fighting soon, but he just kept looking at the rocks and sand. When the monster was almost close enough to touch him, Hyun-woo finally moved. But he did not run toward the creature or away from it. Instead, he ran to a big rock and started climbing up it. The Bruthan followed him up the rock face. Its claws scraped against the stone as it climbed. The watchers were confused. Why was the human climbing? Was he trying to get away? But there was nowhere to go at the top of the rock. The monster would catch him there. Hyun-woo reached the top of the rock, and the Bruthan was right behind him. But the human had seen something that nobody else noticed. There was a long crack in the rock that went deep inside. The crack was thin, but it went all the way through the stone. As the monster climbed toward him, Hyun-woo pulled out his weapon. But he did not point it at the Bruthan. Instead, he aimed at the crack in the rock and fired. The energy beam hit the crack and made it bigger. The rock started to shake and groan. The Bruthan was almost at the top when the whole rock face broke apart. Huge pieces of stone fell down toward the desert floor, but Hyun-woo had planned this. He jumped toward a pile of soft sand while the monster fell onto the hard ground below. The Bruthin hit the ground hard. It was not hurt badly, but it was stunned and confused. In those few seconds, while the monster was trying to get up, Hyun-woo landed in the soft sand and rolled to his feet. He pointed his weapon at the fallen creature and fired. The test was over. The watching aliens sat in complete silence. They had never seen anything like this before. The human had not tried to be faster or stronger than his opponent. Instead, he had made the battlefield itself fight for him. Commander Veltar stared at the human through the glass window. In all his years of watching tests, he had never seen a candidate think to use the environment as a weapon. The test rooms were designed to challenge fighting skills, not engineering skills. Yet somehow this human had turned the rocks themselves into his ally. The other candidates looked at Hyun-woo with new respect as he walked out of the test chamber. Some of them seemed worried. If this human could think of ways to fight that they had never imagined, what other surprises might he have? A tall blue alien named Kexra turned to his friend. Most species develop better muscles or faster reflexes to become good fighters. But this human seems to think about fighting in a completely different way. His friend nodded. It is like he sees the whole world as a weapon instead of just using the weapons he carries. Commander Veltar called his assistant over. Did you record everything that happened? Yes, sir. Every detail. The computers tracked his movements and weapon usage, but they did not expect him to target the rock structure itself. Veltar looked back at Hyun-woo, who was now preparing for the second test. For the first time in many years, the commander did not know what would happen next. The human had broken one of the basic rules of how the tests worked. What other rules might he break? The second test was loading now. It would be an ice planet with frozen lakes and tall ice mountains. The opponent would be a Crystal fighter made of living crystal that could change its body into different shapes. Most candidates tried to hit the Crystal before it could adapt or tried to run away from it, but Veltar had a feeling that the human would do something completely different again, something that nobody had ever thought of before. The test began, and everyone watched carefully. Hyun-woo stood alone on the ice. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. Across from him, the crystal creature began to take shape. Its body shifted and changed as it prepared to fight. The human looked around, at the frozen landscape. But instead of watching his opponent, he seemed to be studying the ice itself. He knelt down and touched the surface with his hand. Then he stood up and smiled. The watchers did not know it yet, but they were about to see something that would change how they thought about fighting forever. The human was not just learning to fight in new places. He was learning to make the places themselves fight for him. And that was something that had never been done before in the history of the galaxy.